All right, so
Welcome back.
we're going to try to catch you up, and hopefully you'll come back with us in some form or fashion. But we're live again.
If for some reason
we're gonna give it just a
you
second.
missed anything that's going on, they're going to be live as videos on YouTube. You can get there from any way. You can check our Instagram. You can check our Facebook or our website, and you'll be able to get to the YouTube link to see the whole video. So don't worry about that. One thing we were just saying, though, is we were talking about the high points of Genesis. We said that it's split up into two segments. You got this one that is the creation, right? The fall happening. Then you've got this seed or this family that God is redeeming for himself, the rest of it. So 1 through 11, 12 through 50, roughly. Yeah. Jacob was talking about this design and purpose that God gives. So as he creates, right, he's creating, and Garrett brought out that these creations are good. God is creating these things for a purpose, which is to glorify him. It's this beautiful, this beautiful creation. Yeah. But talk about what happens in chapter 3.
Yeah, I mean, you get this question that kind of builds up to the fall, where the serpent looks at Eve and says, well, did God really say? Yeah. You know, that's kind of the basis for every sin. And then she takes the fruit and she eats and kind of goes, makes this choice to depart and be independent from the Lord, where she had perfect communion the moment before, and now she's taking matters into her own hands, and thus enters chaos for the rest of time, right?
Yeah, God said in chapter 2, look, you can eat any of these things, but the tree that you can eat, because if you surely die. The word we hear, but it's just a warning, right? If you eat it, you'll die. Well, what do? They eat of the tree, and then therefore, that's what we consider the fall. That's that after creation, the biggest high point. You hit the fall, that's a low point. It's like, story stops. It's the part of the Hallmark movie where you're like, there's no recovery from this. It's over. Right, but we see in that Genesis 3:15 is another high point of Genesis. We see this promise that though this is all broken, the Lord's going to fix this. He says in 3:15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise his head, but you shall bruise his heel. So this one is definitely overcoming and crushing the other.
This thread of hope is kind of starting.
That's right.
We'll see that drawn all the way to the cross at that point.
Yeah, so sorry about the connection stuff. I'm not sure what's happening, and not saying it won't happen again. So we lost a bunch of our people, but maybe you can get on with the recording later. We'll get that out to you. So just to get us back on and keep going, so we start with the creation, and we got these two majors, say creation and this establishing of a family, right? Those are the two main parts. Genesis 1, large, creation, it was good, not good, female created. But then in Genesis 2, it seems like he zeroes in on this most coveted, creation, the ones who were created in his image. And we see this more in-depth telling of who they are and what they've done. And you guys getting us going on perhaps the most major part of Genesis, and that's the first citing of the gospel. And then, you may have already said this all together. I was over here messing with the Facebook side of things, but that is the thread. I did hear thread that's carried out. But then immediately, one thing, just in that first big creation, like in my 5, I've got this Seth part mentioned because like all throughout Genesis, Exodus, the Old Testament, this hope, this promise of Genesis 3:15 is a risk that it's going to get cut off. The seed of the woman, the lineage, the descendants. I mean, like Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, like which one of them is going to be the seed that ultimately gets us to whatever Genesis 3:15 means? And then all of a sudden, right out of the gate, you got these two brothers, and then one's dead and the other one's a murderer. Yeah. But then you see Seth come on the scene, and then you're like, okay, good. And he'll keep going. Yeah, and then all the way through, Genesis, you see the seed is threatened, the lineage, the line. So the line is threatened all the way through, which is why you think about the Gospel of Matthew and why Matthew starts out with how it starts out. And how does it start?
Lineage.
Yeah, this genealogy of saying, all right, I'm going to take you from Adam to Jesus. Yep. Remember Genesis 3:15? All right, here it is. Here's how God kept his promises. And if God can keep his promise to keep one family alive through it all, I think he can be trusted in our situations.
Absolutely.
So we've got creation. We've got in that first part. Let's go with some more, maybe something else in that first part.
Yeah, you also, so if you've got creation, you've got the fall, you got the promise. You see that this is not going well, even though we got a murder now, but there's still a glimmer of hope. We've got Seth. And then what do you come to? Well, God destroys every living thing on the earth because it's sinful. It's corrupt. But does he destroy everything on earth?
No, he preserves Noah, his family, and 2 of each animal.
Yeah, that's right. So even in that, as Chris is talking about a glimmer of hope, there's a glimmer of hope because he didn't destroy everything.
Oh, yeah.
But rather, what is he doing? He's preserving the seed. He's preserving that lineage that we will see, and it'll end up growing to us 4 sitting on the couch. Right? This is a beautiful picture.
You get a huge picture of, and this word's probably not dropped in Genesis, but of grace.
Yeah.
Because Noah is just given, you need to build this ark. Your family's going to be preserved. You're going to house 2 of every animal. And then we're going to see later with Noah, he was definitely not worthy. It's just the Lord saying, I'm going to preserve my people and preserve humanity through, you're just a vehicle, you know?
So 2 problems from Noah and Noah's Ark. All right, not problems that I have, problems that I think could come up that you've got to talk about. Number one, that God did that. Okay, how is that a loving God, a gracious God? And then number 2, like really, two of each kind of animal on this boat, like the reality of that. But then, you know, that like a lot of people will say, I mean, I'm not going to obey that God. And you know, like what would you say to the problem of the animals on the ark itself, but then, you know, the process of getting on the ark where just one family was saved?
I would say, one, the easy get out answer is, well, this is God's creation. He can do as he pleases.
Sure.
But the one aspect of God that we're going to learn about Genesis in general as we talk about what does this teach us about God is the fact that he's holy, right? That he has a standard. He even showed the standard to Adam and Eve, didn't he? Look, you can do all of this except this one thing. They defied that, and so therefore they faced judgment. It's the same deal. God is a holy judge. And that holiness comes from a love of himself and understanding, a right understanding of who he is. And so we've got to understand that God is holy and he will not put up for sin. That's bad news for us because we're sinful. But the beautiful good news is that we'll see later that through Jesus there is a way.
And the thing with having a problem with, well, how can a loving God do this? If he doesn't hold to that standard, then he's not just. And if he's not just, he's just making up as he goes. And that would make him a tyrant. And we know he's not a tyrant. He's holding to his holy, perfect standard that we'll see that only one person can fulfill, right? So I think he's got to hold to that. He doesn't do this out of anger. He doesn't. He's sad, and then the solution is to flood the earth, preserve the family, and keep the thread going.
Yeah, he's very consistent in everything that he does.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think it's not. I don't think it's a cop out to say this is his story. It's his creation.
Yeah.
I think that's like the ultimate answer. Is like you come into my house, and then you guys would have respect and understand. Hey, before I do anything kind of weird or strange or like out of the norm or like the way we do at our house, I'm gonna like, hey, it's okay if I put my feet on the table, right? You know, we hardly ever use coasters, but if I go to somebody else's house, it's their house. I'm going to say, hey, do I need to use a coaster for this? That's courtesy. Sure. And so, like, there's 4 words. I'm just going to jot down words as we're talking through this. And these words are going to be big things that we probably need to hear in our main idea in this broad thing. So far, I've got promises and I've got hope. All right, so that's from God. It's a promise of God and the hope that he gives. And what is that met with? It's met with man's response to God's gift of creation. And the promise really comes out of the first one, and that's rebellion.
Sin and disobedience.
Yeah, God's part in this, he offers hope and he offers promises. And what man brings to the equation is corruption and rebellion. And that's where we're at in the story. So it's like, I mean, we're very fortunate and blessed that God didn't wipe out everything.
So he had every right to.
Yeah, he would have been
for
just
sure.
in doing
Absolutely.
so. That's where we find the graciousness, is that he provided this avenue. He would have been
That's it.
totally right in destroying even Noah and his family and all the animals.
Mm-hmm.
But yet he was so faithful and graceful to not. But even as we see this, the next pillar that we see in Genesis, even after he has taken care of Noah and his family, we find in Genesis, 5, Genesis 6, Genesis 7,
What is
Genesis 8, 11.
Looking for the Tower of
11.
Babel.
Babel.
11. You find the Tower of Babel, where you see these people gathering, right? Descendants of Noah, the people who have been shown grace. They gather together and say, hey, let's build for ourselves a tower, reach the heavens, and do what? Make a name for ourselves, right? Rebellion once again, right after they've been shown grace.
Yeah, and it's something that we've seen 3 times already up to Babel is this God scattering people and sending them out. At one time it was out of his presence, and the next time was off of his planet, and then in this time it's out of this area. 3 times we see God, almost like saying, no, I'm dispersing you out. And so Babel is a big part, and I think Babel is this seam, is this hinge in between this first created part and establishing order, and then Babel is happening, and that's like God's next response. He's promised, I'm not going to wipe out creation again by flood, but this is almost like the same thing as the flood, except everybody keeps their life, but they're just scattered abroad. And so then we enter into this next big high point of the story, and that's as he was sending out, he spoke specifically to one person that we know in our Bibles as Abram. Father Abram at this point. Right? So it's Saul Paul, and then Abraham, and so many sons. So we get to Abraham, and then Abraham starts us out in this lineage thing, because you're watching this trail of people, patriarchs of our faith, and when you get to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you see that little, trio of people that is celebrated for the rest of time in the faith of Judaism and then Christianity. You see these guys come out. So let's just talk about their stories for a little bit, as far as high points. Some things that stick out from Abraham.
Yeah, I think the first thing we see in Genesis 11 and 12 is God calling Abraham, look, come, and then what do I want you to do? I want you to leave everything, and I want you to go to this place you've probably never heard of. What? I'm going to make of you many nations. You ain't even going to be able to count them. And those who bless you, man, I'm going to bless them. Those who curse you, I'm going to curse them. I'm with you. Now go and do this. What? Who are you again? Where did you come from? I mean, it's kind of crazy. And so, but what do we see Abraham do?
He follows. He goes.
Does it? He's obedient to it, and so he goes. And then I think 14 or 15, we see God make this covenant with him, and it's the beautiful story of Abraham. But even in Abraham's story, there's some ups and downs, isn't there?
Yeah,
They face huge trials.
Yeah, I think the thing that I get out of Genesis, and even especially with where we start with the family and we go all the way through the rest of the book, is these moments of moral choices, and we see probably the pinnacle of Abraham's life is when the Lord comes to him at the very beginning of the second part. He says, you're going to go to this foreign land. You're going to leave everything. We know he was probably a very well-off guy with large family.
He's 75, so he's got roots.
Yeah, exactly. He's got roots. And he's going to leave.
Yeah.
And there's not really a hesitation. He just goes. That to me, and you see all throughout his lineage, just this kind of step of faith, further into the promise.
Yeah, and even in his story, you find this barrenness, right? He's automatically met. So he's got a wife, Sarai, will become Sarah, right? And so God says, "Look, I'm going to give you a child," and they both kind of laugh. Look, we're old. There's no way we can have a baby.
No way.
Are you crazy? Sarah literally laughs, and God says, "Okay, well, watch this." So after trying it at their hand in their own disobedient ways, the Lord blesses them with a son, Isaac. And who will go on to be the father of these other ones.
Yeah, so when you think about reading the Bible, one big thing to help guide you as you're reading it is repetitions. And as you're trying to put together these pieces of the story, repetitions are big to it, and already we're seeing a pretty big pattern or repetition in that you have this corruption and rebellion of man met with the promises and the hope and the faithfulness of God. We see that in the beginning, and already just in the beginning of this second part, you see Abraham and you see corruption from the people, but then you see the rebellion of Abraham and his wife to meet this need themselves rather than trusting God. When God spoke to them, they laughed, or Sarah laughs. They end up having the son. Those two people do, and his name is Isaac, which happens to mean he laughs. And so it's a little ironic there. But then one thing that I think is big is the fact that already in the story we're seeing the line challenged yet again. Here's Abraham, the next in line. If he does not have this child, well then, I mean, the line stops. And his wife happens to be barren and cannot produce kids, but then, you know, God gets the last word there. So as we track forward a little bit, we get to the story of Jacob. Jacob and Esau is a big story here. Jacob, not this Jacob, but a different Jacob. So, like, what happens in the story is going to be largely dependent on what this man's name is.
Crazy.
Because had Esau not traded his birthright for Stu, your name could very well be Esau today rather than Jacob. How do you feel about that?
You know, I always thought it was cool I was named after a Bible character, but after reading the story, I kind of thought, what?
It's not
Why?
necessarily a model
Do my
character.
parents just know I'm just a liar?
Yeah, so my question for you, Jacob, is like, is
gosh.
all this outdoorsman stuff, is it a put on? Are you just doing that to ultimately get to like birthright? I mean, 'cause
It's
you
so I
got
can
that.
steal a birthright. That's what it is.
Lentil stew.
Lentils. I do like lentils.
I do too.
That
So,
makes sense.
and that's the story of Jacob and Esau. And I mean, it's a compelling story. It's a scary story. It's a sad story. And then to think that Jacob is one of these patriarch of names, and seeing how he got to that place, and you know, first response may be, that's not fair. But then you quickly look in the mirror and you're like, all right, really, Chris, that's grace spelled out for you right there. So
Oh, that's what we see. We've seen all through Genesis so far. You know, sparing each time. You get
That's right.
Noah with what happened after the ark, Abram taking things into his own hand, and now Jacob. And we'll continue to see that. It's just another film of grace
It's
coming
God
up.
carrying out his purposes despite human sin.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
It's not a plan B. It's part of the plan, and that's just so super hopeful and comforting to know.
So we're just walking through the high peaks. We're just touching some of these stories, and there's so many details hidden in each of these. I mean, you can go to Kennesaw Mountain, you can see it from, you know, miles and miles out, and you can just see that it's a mountain. But then when you get there on the bottom of the mountain and you begin to walk and look around, you see there's a lot more to see here than I thought from 30 miles out. And again, there's going to be a lot here that you would see on these mountains and these peaks. But again, we're just walking through the story. So, you know, if you're keeping track and if you're keeping some words, you know, I'm adding faithfulness of God, you know, in this situation between Abraham, but then also in the Jacob and Esau and Isaac. And then I guess really, I mean, in between Jacob and Joseph, you know, really we hit Joseph to the end of the book.
Yeah.
37 on or something
Yeah,
like that.
that's right.
Yeah, so we get this story of Joseph, which is kind of odd. You know, but like we see that this is whose son?
Jacob's son.
Yeah, it's Jacob's son.
One of 12.
Do I?
One of 12.
One of 12, and like the shining light.
Yeah.
Here's the odd part about this. All right, so Genesis has a lot to do, everything to do with this promise, right? Genesis 3:15. One day, you know, the seed of this woman is going to crush the head of you, Satan, the one who tempted, tricked, and turned their hearts and minds away from me, casting them from my presence. And God declaring that day, we're going to get the last word in this. It's going to be a long battle. Man, has it been a long battle just in our own lives? And then just think about all of, you know, from here to the beginning. And so then we get this trail going forward and the line, following that line. And then you get to Jacob. I mean, like, obviously you would think, well, the story's about Joseph. So I guess Joseph is the one that's got the line, right?
it's not.
But it's not in that. So it's kind of weird that we're not focused. The person we're focusing in on is not the person that's like carrying the seed of the woman, kind of a deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think so. Because in that section you find what Jacob's told me earlier, and I think he's right. You find this almost this statement of what Genesis is in Genesis 50, saying, look, Joseph is saying to his brothers who have just tried to kill him, he says, look, what you guys meant for evil, God has meant for good. God didn't react to make it good and mold it so it would be good, but rather God in the beginning meant it for good.
Yep.
You find man's sinfulness in Genesis, and you find God's faithfulness. I love that word. That's such a great word. You find his grace and faithfulness towards humankind and establishing a people. Because what does Joseph do? Joseph saves the world. God saves the world through Joseph and the provision that he finds as he goes up and down and in and out of greatness and littleness.
Yeah. And one of the greatest chapters to read from the New Testament as you're reading through the Old Testament, if you're chasing and you're following this line, would be Matthew 1. We mentioned it earlier. And so if we just turn there really quick and just see, you're going to hear some of these names that we've covered so far. And if you're like, well, how did you know that Joseph wasn't in the line? Well, Matthew kind of recalls this genealogy of Jesus Christ, and he begins in Matthew 1, and he says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham, starting there, was the father of Isaac. And so if you're going back to the creation and this establishing, it's really strange that they didn't go back to Adam and then Seth and then who? We start with Abraham. That's where God's people and the people of Israel are established there.
Promise.
And so a lot of people say, well, I just get really hung up on, Genesis 1 through 11. Well, when you think about Judaism and you think about the people looking for the Messiah, they had some concerns too, or where do we start this? But they acknowledged the start of Israel as a people with Abraham. And so it goes on, Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah. Not Joseph. He was the father of Joseph, but Joseph was...
He wasn't the seed.
He wasn't the seed, and so we've got Judah here.
Point.
And so, but we do. I love the story of Joseph. We went through it the Sunday night series a while back, and just seeing all the ways that God was faithful to Joseph, and at that very end, Joseph making that statement that Andrew mentioned. What you meant for evil, God intended for good. God used for good. He willed for good. He bent it for good. He meant it for good, and that's so encouraging in our lives. So we're getting a little bit of application, and as you begin to work through this process, and you say, what, I've got a little piece of gold. And it's going to reveal, the more I dig around that truth, I may come out of here with a decent nugget, in a sense. So any other high points or things that we need to see, from this? So we've hit creation, we've hit Seth a little bit, we've hit Noah, we've hit Babel, we've hit Abraham, and then go into Jacob, or Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph, eventually getting to, I think we need to say, hey, Judah was there too. And Judah's part in this story of Joseph is very compelling. And towards the end, Jacob begins to bless all of his sons. And what he says to all of his sons is very interesting. So that's a neat little section to dig in on. But I think as far as we're concerning the line, you better say Judah as one of these high points too. But it's encapsulated in the story of Joseph. So any other thoughts from that?
I think that covers it.
Okay, so let's do this really quick, because we've largely identified the mountains and the key thoughts, characteristics of God, characteristics of man, to see maybe what this book largely is saying to us. Would you all agree, or do you think there's any other things that we might need to dig around with? So let's do this. You guys maybe have, who has a main idea that you want to throw out?
I got a working one that I feel like is continuously being molded. So I'll go ahead and throw it out while you're writing. I put the very good creation, right? It's what God's word's very good. The very good creation, fallen, and God's redeeming work beginning. I think that's the story. That's the book of Genesis, right? This beautiful creation, but it's fallen, and God begins this redeeming work.
It's my idea for the Bible. I mean, that's what
think
we
so,
see.
yeah.
We see creation, we see the fall, and then on we see God working.
Yeah, God working to redeem it.
That's good. Mine's a little wordy, but it's when humanity or humans think that they can live independent of God, it always results in chaos and death.
Yeah, and I think I think some key things that we would want to see. I think we need to hear about God's faithfulness, God's grace, God's hope, God's promise in the midst of the people's response to Him as His holy Creator God. So I kind of wrote down one that says, though man's sin and wickedness is plenty, God's faithfulness, grace, and provision is more. So those are the two things that I see, coming out from the book, is man always seeming to be opposing who God is. Now you see some shining lights. Joseph, you see Abraham, when called, he did go, and he had roots where he was, but he was going away. You see Abraham getting this son and then being willing to sacrifice this son. And I'm just going to trust you, God. So you do see faithfulness on man's part, but as a whole, you see corruption, you see rebellion, you see wickedness and sin, which got us all into this boat in the first place. No pun intended, Noah. But that's what happens. But then the response that God gives is faithfulness and being true to this promise and showing grace and mercy when the people did not deserve that. So the first response was man's. God gives them this creation. This is yours. Maintain it. Steward it for me. You have dominion over them. Man's response to that is, but we want to be like you. Well, God's response to that should have been like, all right, you're out of here. And it kind of was, but you're out of my presence.
Yeah.
And you're going to find out just how good you had it. And then their response to that is just like that, 5-year-old kid, and you just want to go to the kid and go, look, you got it good, dude. Just like, shut up.
Orange juice and apple juice are your hardest choices.
Kind of go. So I mean, some good thoughts and working main ideas, but I think at the end of the day, however you say it, it's almost like, in light of man's response to this holy creator God, God continues to offer hope that is found in His faithfulness and His grace towards those people who are constantly running away. And I think we could all agree, and thank you for coming back to watch, and sorry about all that went down on the connectivity. But I think, we still battle that today. We still see this today.
Sure.
The application is not hard for us to go back and see, all right, so these people reading this in the midst of some hard times, the Exodus, the wandering, and they're seeing, all right, look, this is not the first time men have been corrupt or men have rebelled, and look at how God responded each and every time with justice. There's sometimes Noah's Ark, and giving people what they deserve, Babel, and even Joseph's brothers, and then you have this man named Joseph who reacts in a way that we've seen God react the whole book. And so I think that's a key ending to the book of Genesis, is that you got this physical man who is responding to these wicked brothers in the same way that God has responded to wicked people all along. And so we get this main idea of God being faithful and full of grace and mercy in the midst of man being corrupt, sinful, and rebellious. And so then we get to, all right, so then from that, what does it teach us about God? What does it teach us about Jesus? And ultimately, what are some themes that I think it's good to say, these are some themes that we need to keep an eye out as we next week go to Exodus, and maybe it'd be cool to say, all right, here's some themes we saw last week. Let's see if we can see these workings in Exodus, or do we identify some new ones? So let's start with the first one. What does it teach us about God, this book?
I've got a couple of things, because it's all about God. That's a story. The story of the Bible is pointing us to God, what He's doing. So I'm just going to rattle off a few, because I know we're rolling on time. So here's a couple. One, God has always been. We don't see God created in the beginning of the story. Right? He has always been. Psalm 90 would say, look, from everlasting to everlasting, here is this God. So He's always been. He is creator. He's the one doing this, right? That He is good. So He is creating these good things, ultimately saying it's very good. Right? I also put that He's holy, and He requires holiness. He requires obedience. That's what He tells Adam and Eve. We see as He commands Moses next week. As He commands Noah to do these things, he either has a choice: are you going to do this, or you're not going to do this? But we ultimately see that he is a holy God, and ultimately he desires himself to be glorified. Everything he has created that we see, this plan that's unfolding, as Chris said earlier, is for our good, but then it's ultimately to see him glorified. We learn that God is Trinitarian in nature. There's three. If we look at the creation account, even Genesis 1, 26 and 27, let us make man in our own image. God is 3 in 1. But then I put at the end of it, it's like God is restorative and he is gracious. God is not going to let his creation go to pits on his watch. He's not going to allow it. Rather, this is the story of the Bible. This is the narrative that God is redeeming all things to be perfect. All in this culmination, this consummation of everything being perfect in the new heavens and new earth.
Yeah, and so I've got some bullet parts too, and so maybe because it is kind of late, we can just kind of read those statements. If y'all want to chime in here, as far as what does it teach us about God? As far as the before all, I just put he is above all and before all, that he is loving. He created and then displayed ultimate patience over and over. It shows that God is working always and forever for his glory and our ultimate good. It shows that he is serious about his creation and us as created. It shows that he can bring good from any evil, but also that he can choose to leave us to deal with those same circumstances. It teaches us a lot about who God is and how God acts. So, y'all have anything?
I think it's important to know that no matter how far man gets away, that no matter how far man falls, God's goodness still overshadows that, and it's still greater, and it can't be overshadowed. It can't be, and like you said, that he is, he wants to receive glory. Totally, he's going to receive glory. It's not that he waits for. He doesn't wait. He's going to make it to where he receives the glory through it all because he deserves it, because he is a creator. He is a restorer. And that's so cool to see through this whole book.
Yeah. And so then we get to Jesus. What is this book, the first book, the one that unlaunches everything? What does this teach us about Jesus? How does this book point us to Jesus?
And his name's not even, we don't see his name anywhere in the book. So you could say, well, it don't teach us anything about Jesus, but it does, right? Just a few other bullet points. He's created all things through him. Hebrews 1 would say, you can read it later, right? Ultimately, Chris took us to Matthew 1, right? He's the culmination of the seed. He's where that seed stops. That's what he is. The snake crusher is a term that Chris was using. Now, he's also the better Adam, right? We see creation grow through this, but then ultimately we see God's children grow through Jesus. He's the means by which he's restoring all things. Through Jesus, Paul would say in Colossians 1 that God is restoring, renewing all things through. But then ultimately, the beautiful picture that the gospel paints for us is he is the means by which we can please this holy and righteous God. He is what makes us holy and righteous.
Yeah, so in a very short way, we can say Genesis 3:15 is how this book points to Jesus. He's the revealing of the promise of God at the very beginning. Yeah. And you're like, oh, you can't say that from the book. Well, here's the deal for us. We can because we got the whole book. Yeah. And so the rest of the book points us to that reality. Now, Exodus, they didn't know it. But Matthew sure did. Yeah. That was the Messiah and those that recognized him. So just real quick, popcorn, themes. So themes that we can see established here in the first beginning of the book that we're going to see all throughout the Bible. So any themes?
I think faithfulness, steadfastness, grace, mercy,
promise keeping.
Yeah, promise keeping, absolutely. Covenant keeping.
God creating this kingdom. He's the king of his own kingdom, and
for sure.
And he's working and orchestrating how things work out.
I thought you were going to say waymaker since he said promise keeper.
Waymaker. He's a waymaker. He made no ways from nothing, so he's got a ton of ways now.
Yeah. So those are things that we'll see that are established here and later revealed, kept, and met in Christ and the Holy Spirit too. You get this presence of God. That's a big part. Kingdom is attached to presence, but presence is also attached to the Holy Spirit because, the thinking is going to be in the presence of God. And then, the church comes along, and then you've got the people, and you get Jesus come along, the kingdom. We get to King David and Israel and Judah, they want to be like they want a king like all the other nations. Yeah. So you get this maturation process, this maturing process of the presence of God to now the presence of God indwells the people, and that would have blew their mind back in the days in Sinai, and you know, don't even look upon them, and now you're saying, wait, you got God in
He's
you?
in us.
Yes, we do, and it's glorious. We could say
feels
we could
good.
say that. So then let's wrap it up by just talking about some application. First book of the Bible is Genesis. There's 5 major mountain peaks, really, you could say, divided into 2 little groups, talking about the establishment of creation, and then you get this, you know, family heirlooms of the creation. This is how the promise is going to be swept through all of history, ultimately coming out in Jesus Christ. So you're taking me all the way back to the beginning. How do I apply what I hear now? Well, I would say this. You know, I'll say this and then let you guys respond to it. Here's been the themes: the faithfulness, grace, and mercy of God. So what should we do after learning that God is faithful, gracious, and merciful?
You know, we trust and believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Find encouragement in those things. Even though he was that in Genesis, however long ago, man, he's the same God ruling and reigning over our lives right now. That stuff brings me encouragement. Just like it would have Israel in the middle of wandering in the wilderness, looking at trees, right? That gives them encouragement. And man, it gives us encouragement.
Yeah,
It gives
so-
us something to hold on to.
Yeah, and it's so then if I say, all right, not only is he those things, but the way that he kind of has shown us that he is those things is that he is a promise keeper.
Yep.
All right, so if I say Genesis reveals to us that God is a promise keeper, specifically of the seed of the woman. God kept that promise. I would want to say, okay, how and where? Because that's where I need to run, where it's Jesus. So ultimate application is run to Jesus
Yep.
for salvation and for sanctification, for holiness, and for day-to-day living. You've got to have Jesus. So we would encourage anybody that's watching, that's listening at any time. I mean, your only hope is in Jesus. He is the culmination, the fulfillment, the redemption of God's promise that he made in the very beginning of the Bible. 3 chapters in, man is rebelled, it's corrupt, sin is all over the place. God responds not by wiping them all out and starting over, though he kind of does in Noah, but at the very beginning he says, well, look, you know, you're going to get yours, Satan, right? And it's going to come from the seed of this woman you have corrupted. And the fulfillment of that is Jesus Christ. So, I mean, just the simple ones, I think, you know, what are we to know? I think all that we've said.
Yeah.
I mean, we already know that God is these things and that
Yeah.
we have this nature. I mean, somebody said at the very beginning before we started talking, I think you did, Garrett, that, you know, Jesus is this truer and better Adam. You know, he came on the scene and did and accomplished that which Adam was unable to, and that's to faithfully please God completely. And Jesus did that on our behalf. So we need to know all of those things that we talked through, but then to trust him, to obey him, to worship him, to know that the hope that he set on course from the very beginning is going on still to this very day. So, you know, then what you need to do is just, you know, ultimately figure out specifically for you, what is that specific application for you? And I want to end it with us this way, and each of us just kind of give, you know, real life example. Like, you know this story. We've talked through this story. So you're walking out of here knowing in your heart and your mind, all right, what's my response from hearing this book today? So we'll start with you, Tony.
Yeah, totally. So if we split these things up into know and to do, one, you need to know that God is good, that he is with you, that he cares about you, and that should drive you to confidence in him. So as you sit at home in stress and worry about COVID-19, about your grades from your school ending, about your parents getting a divorce, your parents fighting, your breakup relationship, as you're dealing with all this, here's what you need to know. The same God that created everything from nothing cares about you. And you can trust in him. And that's one of the greatest things you could ever do. And he is working in and around you right now. Man, you should believe that.
Yeah.
You should find confidence in that, regardless of the situation that any of these guys say. Man, take heart.
Great point. But, like, how are you?
Specifically me?
Yeah, you.
Yeah, I think so. I struggle with fear and anxiety. Man, this gives me a great hope and a great confidence in the one who has orchestrated the heavens and the earth, who's created people from dust. Look, then I know he's got control of my situations. My situations are small in comparison with speaking into existence everything, right? That gives me confidence to walk out the doors and say, look, I ain't got this, but I know the Lord does.
For sure.
What about you?
I think it would be the worthiness of God. We see he's worthy of our praise. He's worthy of glory. And we see that through his creation and through the start of redemptive history as we see it in Genesis. So that means with my mind, with my heart, in my interaction with people, as we just got done with our relationship series, every aspect of my life, I should praise him and give him glory through that, whatever it may be. So I think that's my application is as I'm working, as I'm at church, as I'm here with you guys. I mean, wherever I'm at, I don't have to be at church to praise and to give glory to God. He's worthy of it wherever I'm, whether I'm by myself when no one else is seeing. He's worthy of it then. And he's worthy of it right here when I'm on Rock Live. So good.
That's helpful. I think for me, one of the things I struggle with is every day when I sin, I'm easy to get down on myself and kind of go down in the depths of that. And it's good to feel the weight of my sin, but Genesis reminds me that regardless of the amount or the extreme nature of my faithlessness, that he's always faithful, that he's always drawn this thread, that he's called me into a relationship with him. And there's nothing I can do, what Romans says, that will ever pluck me from his hand. And I'm just really reminded of that in the different high points that we see through Genesis, that regardless of, no matter what I do, and the maybe the minorness of it to me or the majorness, he's never going to let me go, and he's never going to stop loving me.
Yeah, I'm very hard on myself and hold myself, it probably doesn't appear that to be the case a lot of times, to a very high standard, to do stuff with excellence. Or I'm very hard on myself when I can't do those things well. And, Genesis pulls me back to my own corruption and sin and inability and faithlessness, because I'm very hard in how I fail God. And, not to the point of like quitting and giving up and scary things, but just to the point I just feel bad, but this book really calls me back to what really matters, and that's the faithfulness of God, and that he is merciful and gracious. He has called us to live, in things and in different ways. And so we are to be diligent in the pursuit of those things, but even when we fail, and are faithless, that he is faithful. And, as Jacob says, that nothing's ever going to pluck us from his hand.
Yeah. Yeah, I love because what it makes you think of is Genesis teaches us that we are way more sinful than we ever thought we were, and God is way greater than we think.
Yeah, because there's people that I know that would think that, man, I'm pretty good, in comparison to your neighbor. But the real standard is the holiness of God, in which we all fell.
Read the Beatitudes, you'll find out.
And so that's a good point. So
I think it's Keller that says we're far more sinful than we ever dared believe. But we're far more loved than we ever dared hope. And that's just something that's one of those threads through Genesis for me.
It is.
So good.
Well, thanks for joining us. Sorry for the hiccup in the middle. We retained many of you. Many of you said, check you later. That's fine. The good thing is you can come back and watch this. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you enjoyed it, anything that we can do to maybe help you out a little bit more. It's encouraging for us. We know the summer crowds are light anyway, and so people are gone constantly with different things, and so that summer crowd really starts to dwindle down anyway. But
you can take church with you, though.
Yeah, that's can take. I mean, like that's the truth about it, is that you can go anywhere, and you can still have the Rock SM Live on your phone, tablet, or computer. And so we hope you do that. But even if you don't do it live, you can always go back and watch it because it's recorded. So that's very encouraging. And I'm looking forward to 5-6 years down the road when we say, hey, we finished the Elevate series.
That'd be cool.
And that'll be really cool to go back, and you've got this big overview of every book of the Bible. So it's encouraging for us, so we're going to keep doing it. We hope you enjoy it, and we hope you join us. But if not, we'll be here every Wednesday at 6:45 talking through the books of the Bible. So we love all of you. We appreciate you. We miss you. Crazy. And we'll let you know the plan moving forward for Wednesday nights at the Rock. But just know that we're going to be here in this way until that does happen. So just stay tuned for messages and different things regarding camp and our Sunday services. So everybody have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we will see you guys soon. Love you. Peace out.